Hey, this is John Sadak, TV voice of the Cincinnati Reds, and you're up for Late Night Reds Talk.
What is going on, everybody? It is Wednesday night, and you know what that means. Another fantastic edition of Late Night Reds Talk Live. As you can see, our guests and I were the only ones that got the memo for Hawaiian T-shirt night here on the pod, but that is okay. We will still go on. Our excellent panel, as always, Mr. Red Leg Nation himself, Nick Kirby.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the off season.
Welcome to the off season. I love that you are, as we pointed out last week, still rocking your Believe Ted Lasso behind you. So digging it.
It's a yearly thing, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I think so. Also joining us, of course, former big league pitcher Carlos Guevara. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Doing a little bit better since I saw Mr. Sadak shirt. That thing is money.
It is money. It is money. And as Carlos mentioned, our guest back for a second time, our friend of the program, we can say now that he's been with us multiple times. Bally Sports play-by-play man for the Cincinnati Reds just wrapped up his first year as our TV man that we've been long and dying for many, many years, but that's a different story. Our good pal, and hopefully yours, John Sadak. What's up, man?
Everything. It's so good to be with you guys. And as Carlos mentioned, this shirt is quality. I got it through the telethon. So anybody else that donated this year also got one of these bad boys. It just came for me in the mail recently. And so it's basically unboxed and christened with this.
Love it. Love it. My wife bought this for me when we were dating 2 years ago. And it's the first time I've worn it. You made a Ninja Turtles reference earlier this year on a TV game. So I had to break my Ninja Turtles Hawaiian shirt out.
That is legit. I actually was just watching a documentary the other day about some of the history of the Turtles and the fallout between the two creators.
Yeah.
I didn't know if they have a giant rift between them now.
John, that between you and I could be a podcast in and of itself. Believe me. Believe me. We can
risk. How did you get that shirt 2 years ago from your wife and this is the first time you've worn it?
Well,
trouble.
Yeah, you're right. I ran her upstairs real quick because I did my other show tonight, and she had it sitting there waiting for me to put on. So, yeah, nice. God love her. She's the best. All right. So, John, you just wrapped up year one with the Reds. Obviously, at least an interesting year. Didn't go the way any of us wanted to, like you mentioned. But I think I first want to start with a certain timeline this year of you having to call Joey Votto hitting a home run every night there for a stretch. Did you go with the game broadcast just expecting you were going to see one at some point?
Yes. Oh, yeah. During the run, yes. Maybe not in the very beginning. I mean, you knew that there was a chance for excitement with him, but obviously that was peak Votto. Yes, by the time that third, fourth game, it did almost feel expected, and yet at the same time, all the more shocking in a good way, just fun and celebratory, because he was making a run at history. I mean, that was an all-time surge of power.
I think the Cubs 2 home run game was when it was suddenly like, okay, this is something.
Yeah, even the way that it closed, that was one of his best hit balls of that stretch. And it's, inches away off the top of the wall at Citi Field, a ball that he just clobbered for a single. That was about as locked in for a power hitter. You could see it in the aftermath of each homer and his body language as he rounded the bases and the fun factor that you could feel and see sincerely coming from him. There's very much such a thing as a zone. And anybody who's ever played sport or has witnessed people that play it at the highest level that really have that otherworldly talent, they can take it to that other gear. And he did. That was dominance.
Yeah, it just got to the point where it was just a blast. It did start on my birthday, as I've mentioned on the show in the past. So, I'll say I'll take some sort of credit for it. Yeah.
I love it.
So obviously, like we said, so you just wrapped up year one. When you were on with us in June, it was just after they took 3 out of 4 from the Brewers, or was that the sweep? Next was, I think it was a sweep because they won 2-1 that day. Weirdly, I remember that, but neither here nor there. Your first year in Cincinnati, you talked at that point just how much you were really still settling in. I believe you just said your wife and daughter just recently moved into town. So now that you're done with year one, when you look back on your first year in Cincinnati, what will you take away from that year, the first year with us?
Number one, just how fun it was. I mean, to me, like that's the singular word that kind of defined the majority of the season. You know, baseball is a long, arduous marathon on many levels for a lot of people that are involved in the game, and it never felt like that this entire year. And certainly, there's got to be an element to it that it's my first year, so that there's a new factor for me personally. But I really felt that, and I think I hoped it translated to everyone else too. That there was this sense of wonder of like, what were you going to see in the game that night? That was going to be fun and entertaining and loose and sincere and authentic and human. And this team just felt like a very fun group that was capable of almost anything on any night. Sure, they were flawed. And yeah, there were down moments, and it didn't end the way that any of us would have wanted or probably would have forecasted, you know, at the midway point of the season. But I think all things considered, it was a year of extreme promise that showed what some of the talents could be. And my biggest takeaway is that it was incredibly fun. I mean, the game is fun. And this team was one of the most fun teams in the sport for most of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been other Reds teams that have, you know, been around 500, and it didn't have that type of feel. So it's definitely not just you and your first year on that. I think, you know, one of my favorite things about, you know, you and Barry and Chris and Cowboy on the broadcast is, you know, I think I appreciated you guys most in September. You know, I think you guys really kept you know, a fun and positive broadcast, even when the times were tough. And for me, that's what baseball's about. It's about turning on the broadcast and just enjoying. You know, it's not always going to go the way you want, but you just kind of having that enjoyment. And yeah, I loved you guys in September as much as I loved you guys in June.
I appreciate that. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, throughout the year, definitely. I mean, the season was just, you know, up and down roller coasters, injuries. You know, we had different guys getting hot different times. I mean, from hitters to pitchers, like it was just all over the place. And the thing that remained consistent was you guys in the broadcast booth. And I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but it was a joy to listen to this year. We appreciate it.
That's very kind of you guys. Thank you. Yeah, it's and I think you touch on something there, Carlos, that I also think very much is an identifier of this year. And the next man up, you know, mentality is very cliche. It's something that's talked about all the time and rarely executed. And I thought this team really did that. I mean, and then eventually their lack of depth was part of the reason for, you know, the ultimate conclusion of the year. But I mean, when you look at what most of the game is right now, look at the teams in the playoffs, you know, that have had similar or even more extreme struggles on that stage. Like I think the White Sox are a very good team. And the Astros were clearly better. I mean, that's some of the margin for error that exists within the game. But I think that was part of the fun. I mean, who would have thought Kyle Farmer would have 3 dominant weeks like he did? When Winker, you know, got hurt, Tyler Naquin went on this otherworldly run, you know, hitting often in the 2-hole with power and getting on base at a super high stretch. And I think those moments were their own kind of, you know, celebratory revel to see that kind of success at peak high levels come for guys that you wouldn't have expected that from over that longer a stretch of time.
Yeah, it certainly, you know, had to be a fun, entertaining team to watch on a daily basis. And, you know, like everyone said, you obviously contribute to that. And like you said, just like all the different things you saw, I think one of the biggest things that we've talked about is just kind of this growth we saw from the younger guys. Obviously, Johnson India looking like right now, you can probably go on FanDuel and make a pretty decent bet that he's going to go National League Rookie of the Year. Tyler Stevenson stepping up. You know, the last two, you know, we talked to Raymer San Martin last week, getting 2 starts of the year and just being really impressive and not scared to take the ball. It just kind of felt like for you, like one, it's like, yeah, you're going into your next season, but you're also kind of seeing some pieces of guys that you're going to be probably doing games and play-by-play on for probably, you know, maybe hopefully the rest of your career for us, we hope, hopefully.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's I mean, the ceiling for some of these young guys, India is my going away. I get the arguments you can make for votes for some of the other candidates that are very deserving of that. but the whole body of work, what India accomplished this year, I just would be flabbergasted if he were not the rookie of the year. I think the stability that he brought to that leadoff spot, not only his high-end performance, but I think that gives an identity to the team. A lot of the way he plays, the grittiness, the fact that guys like, Votto and Castellanos are lauding his talent and work ethic and attitude and citing it as a positive influence on them. I mean, how often does that happen? It's normally the exact opposite. Even a performing rookie is, more heavily, and not to say he's not influenced by the veterans, but that these older guys are acknowledging and giving credit to a first-year dude and having that kind of impact on them personally, I think is significant. Stevenson he's a rising star. That dude, he has such uncanny ability to come through in big moments. A lot of his biggest moments came off the bench as either a pinch hitter or as a replacement in the later stage of the game. And that's really hard to do. I mean, it's hard to hit, period, let alone to be called upon in spots like that. And he did it with such seeming regularity and with such ease. I don't know what goes on internally for him, but based on body language, the calmness and coolness that he has, the ability to go to 0-2 and to somehow work a 10-pitch at bat and get on base with an up-the-middle opposite-way contact. I think there's a lot of upside to Gutierrez. Looked like he probably hit the wall there, 3-4 starts before the end of the year. But the bulk of his year for a rookie to be a stable starter from when he first joined the rotation in May in Chicago, basically through, until the last several weeks of the season. And I'm with you on Raver San Martin. He is fun to watch. He looks like a young Wade Miley. He looks like if you could, I wonder if he may benefit from being up tempo a little bit like Miley to keep guys a little more off balance. And if he could almost in some ways, mimic part of what he does, I think there's a lot of room for that in today's game that's based on velocity, that's based on pure stuff. And San Martin, based on location, keeping the ball down, being more of a ground ball guy, and he can learn that cadence going in and out, I think it's the chance to give even more length, to give more innings, and perhaps be a piece.
I'm also not convinced he's not the long-lost brother of NBA star Jimmy Butler.
Facially very similar. Yeah. Very, very similar. Yes. He looks a little bit like Luis Severino too. There's a resemblance there.
So for you kind of broadcasting games, we talked about, obviously you couldn't go on the road with the team because of COVID restrictions. Radio got to, what was that challenge like calling games from studios while the team's on the road, and also kind of like, home games you're working with Barry, road games you're working with Cowboy and Chris, and you're kind of building a whole different chemistry with those guys compared to your with Barry. What was that process like for you? How difficult was that at times?
Well, I'll start with the second part first, working with different analysts. For me, I don't think it was as challenging as it might be for some others, chiefly because most of my work has been national over the last 7-8 years. So it's pretty common, especially in basketball season, that I would have a rather wide variety of partners. And even football wise, I did NFL on radio and college games on TV. And while my college partner was usually Randy Cross, there were sprinkled games with others. And then radio would be like 4 or 5 different guys. Basketball, I'd probably work with 7 to 10 different partners a year. And then at least 2 to maybe 5 of them are changing annually. So I've kind of been down that road before. So that I actually viewed it as more relative stability for me, the fact that I got to work as many games as I did with each of them. They each have their own style and they each have their own strengths. And so there is a different way that I approach each game with each guy, and different ways that I try to engage them or try to let them shine. I mean, I view in television play-by-play, or television broadcasting, I should more accurately say, that the play-by-play person's role is more of point guard. It's the analyst is really the star, and it's your job to try to set up the analyst as best as you can. Where radio, it's the opposite. Radio, I mean, there's nothing. It's a total blank canvas. You're describing everything. The play-by-play guy has to really be the quarterback calling the shots and is really organizing and doing most of it. And the analyst is kind of getting in when and how they can. TV, it's totally inverted. But in terms of like the relationships or the challenges of calling from studio, it's not ideal. I had done it because of the pandemic. for a lot of my football and basketball, including some radio NFL games. I did a playoff game off a monitor in a truck in South Jersey, the Bills-Colts playoff game. So I'd done it before. I think baseball's harder. It's way harder to do than basketball off a monitor. It's a little harder than football. Football's hard. College games, because you have so many players that go in and out, and identifying people and angles are more limited sometimes. Baseball's hard because the number one thing is reading the ball off the bat. Like when you call a baseball game, when you come up in the minors, you don't have a monitor ever. You don't watch the swing. You often can't see the swing. You're in a really bad location for that. You read the outfielders. They tell you what's happening with the ball. And sometimes they dupe you. I mean, Jackie Bradley Jr. did that famously for a double play in the early stage of the year. But, it's generally pretty true. With our monitor setup, that was not possible. So that was really hard to get a feel for. It probably took a couple of months to get kind of okay at it. And I don't know that I ever got great at it. The even bigger challenge to me, though, was just atmosphere. There's an energy that exists in a ballpark, and there's nuanced detail that you notice in the stadium. You can look in the dugout and see, is David Bell talking to somebody? Does somebody have a bat ready? We had none of those angles, at least in my spot. Where I was, we had 3 monitors. One was the program feed that the viewers saw. One was an all 9 or high home, so behind home plate, super high looking down. And that depended on the ballpark. Some were lower than others. Some were a lot higher than others. Some were a true high def signal for us. Some, it looked like an 8-bit Nintendo game. The resolution was not good. So I could tell if a runner is being sent around third, but if they had a pinch runner come on, I couldn't identify who it was, especially if it was the opponent. If there was a pinch hitter standing on deck, I just saw a little whiter gray blob. Like you couldn't make out who it was. And then the third monitor was just MLB game day, just like the running score of the game. So I could look at things like exit velo and distance, and even more so official scoring decisions, which were then delayed from what they actually were and wrong probably 5 times, and they would get changed, a couple of minutes thereafter. But to me, though, the hardest part of it was just relationships with guys on the team. Like I don't have much of a relationship with most of the guys on the team. And I recognize the major league level is not the minors. It'll never be the same it was for me those years, literally shoulder to shoulder on the bus. When I'm in A-ball, I'm reserving hotel rooms for the guys' family members when they're in town. But on the road is where that really happens more, even in the big leagues, because you're the second team out to work out. So the players are more likely to kind of linger and to be out there waiting for the home team to be done. And that's when you can chit chat for 5 minutes and try to pick somebody's brain. And it doesn't even have to be about the game. And it builds a relationship and a rapport that allows for other stories to come out that are beyond baseball often, and then can lead to tangible baseball topics. When the team's at home, I go down on the field. When they're coming out, they basically come out and go right to work. They're at stretch, they're playing catch, they're hitting, they may be shagging, and then they're going in. And I feel like that's their work time. I feel like for me, it's incumbent upon me to be there. I need to show face, because if anybody has an issue with something I said, or I want to be there and be accountable and be able to talk to them in some way. But I also feel like unless they linger or they approach me, then I'm kind of interfering with what they're doing. Like they're in their space to get ready for the game. And some guys, that's what they want to do. So I had more limited interaction. I didn't have none, but I had very limited interaction this year compared to any other year that I've been in baseball. And they had the COVID issues and not being on the road were the number one reason for it. And I speak to my brethren in the league that have been in it for a long time, and they experienced a lot of the same thing, especially those TV guys that did it travel. I'm very optimistic and hopeful that we will travel next season. But that's a legitimate challenge, and it's something that I will have to find a way around in some way if circumstances are the same.
Are the guys traveling right now in the playoffs?
Well, none of the team broadcasters for TV travel, so it's only network level guys. Okay. So the network guys, there's no home team,
that's right, yeah.
Braves broadcast so the radio guys that we're traveling still are. The national guys, at least on the second half of the schedule, were traveling. when Brian Anderson and Ron Darling did the TBS show of the game against the Dodgers, they were physically there in the stadium in Cincinnati. But most of the year that was kind of mixed and not always the case.
I gotcha. So, talking about the different people that you've had in and out with you throughout the year, the question that I had was, okay, like dream scenario, you're going to call one game. It doesn't have to be a Reds game, but who are the other two guys in the booth with you all time?
Oof. I mean, I love our guys. I really do. If you're saying I can't choose the Reds guys.
Yeah, you can't choose Reds guys.
You can't choose them.
Okay. If I have to go all time on color, I would say I do love Ken Singleton was a fantastic announcer. Great player too. Just recently announced his retirement. Super prepared, funny, sincerely nice, great human being that I've had a chance to meet a bunch. It does a great show, a really great show. He was part of the local broadcast for the Yankees for decades. And it had worked nationally in select games here and there too. I always thought that he was great. And if I'm not allowed to choose anybody Reds at all, because I think Pete would be fantastic. I think that would be tremendously fun. But if I cannot choose Reds, want to make sure I get this. So I can't choose Joe. I would say I don't know if he fully qualifies. I found I don't know if you declare Seaver a Red. I thought Seaver was excellent at the ins and outs of pitching on a broadcast.
I never heard him.
Yeah, he was, and yeah, he had an old school approach to pitching, but a cerebral way to break things down. And was an excellent storyteller. And I never had a chance to personally meet him, but many that I know have. Those pressed to it in the moment. That's who I would immediately say. It's honestly something I'd have to give a tremendous amount of depth and thought to beyond that. But that would be my knee-jerk reaction if I could not choose Reds. Nice.
That's a good couple of guys. We'll circle back next time you're on.
Okay.
Do you do you have a favorite national broadcaster or one of the pairings for the postseason that you really just enjoy listening to?
I would say there's not one. There's a lot of guys that I think are great. There's a lot of guys I think are great that are in the minors too. I think like the PCL was loaded with them. There was a year, or several years, I guess, when MILB.com, the minor league site, would archive every minor league broadcast at every level, from rookie ball all the way through AAA. And I made it a point one year to purposely listen to at least a full inning of every announcer that was in the sport that year.
Holy.
Because I would have to do, I did the PR too for our team. So I'd be working on game notes, and I'm a night owl. So I'd be up until 2 a.m. working on the game notes. So I just have that on in the background. And I'm not even really actively listening necessarily all the time, unless the guy's really good. And there were a lot that were really, really good. Ryan Radke was with Reno forever, and before that Tucson, who now works nationally for Westwood One, was excellent. Mike Capps, who works at Round Rock, excellent. Russ Langer, who worked in Las Vegas, excellent. But among the names you would more readily recognize that work nationally now, I've always loved Dan Schulman. I think he's very polished, he's very researched, but he's still human, and he's electric, and he nails huge moments. I think he does a fantastic job with his baseball. I love John Shambi. I love that he's very forward thinking with a lot of his analytical views, that he challenges his analysts, but in very fun ways. He's very engaged with what's happening in the game. I always love John Miller. I mean, there's a power and a fun factor to the way that he calls a game. And to me, all these guys, when I hear their voices, I think big game. You think big moment. But I thought they're all excellent. But there's a number of guys who I've loved. And And I would say there's probably many more that most people have never heard of that I think are every bit the equal, if not in some cases the superior, that just haven't had their shot.
I love when Shulman does basketball too. And, he's definitely had like kind of that end around. Like, I felt so bad for him when he do shit with a game with Dan Dockich, because I think Dockich is terrible, but Shulman's incredible. So those are pretty rough. But like Shulman's up there as far as like when he does like college games, I think he's terrific. Other sports wise, what about it for like you? Like, for me, like I cover the NBA also. And if I'm flipping through it a Friday night and it's two teams I don't care about, but Mike Breen's calling the game, I'm stopping. I'm listening to his broadcast. It's just, are there guys like that for you as well?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Oh, and I do want to make sure that I mention Jason Benetti too, nationally. I found during some of the playoffs, I was watching the alternate StatCast version with Jason, who does the White Sox games and works nationally for ESPN a lot. He and I were in A-ball and in AAA together. I think he does great work. Hoops. Yes. I think Kevin Calabro, who was the Seattle Sonics announcer forever. Then he did the NBA Finals on ESPN Radio. Then he went to the Portland Trailblazers doing TV. His TV and his radio calls are amazing. Excellent. I think Ian Eagle is out of this world great.
Man, the best.
We've crossed paths several times. He's helped me out in many ways. He's a very generous mentor and a friend. I think he's super, super talented. I'm the same with Shulman. I think Shulman does an excellent basketball call. He's very rhythmic. He builds in a brilliant way. Mike Breen is otherworldly, amazing. Bang! Like it just, it's him. He has an iconic kind of sound to him, and he replaced the legend, and has become his own legend. He has been the voice of the finals for over a decade now. Let me think on hoops. I think Kevin Harlan's basketball is also excellent.
Very good.
No regard for human life. I mean, it's he has that power and that resonance to him that I think are excellent. Wayne Larrabee, who is the voice of the Packers now on radio, did Bulls games for a long time. He was excellent. I think there's a ton of dudes like that. One up-and-coming guy who also does games for the Orioles, does some Major League postseason games on ESPN Radio, Kevin Brown. I love his baseball. I think his basketball is also exceptional. He was in Syracuse when I was in Scranton. Super, super talented guy.
You mentioned on Jim Day's pod, which we had you on before that this year. I want to make sure everyone knows that Late Night Red Sox had John Sadak first before Jim Day. Just
That's
making
true.
sure.
That's true.
But you had mentioned when you're on Jim's pod, the week after us, mind you, that you had interest in maybe one day doing WWE for commentary. And what would that scenario be like for you? What do you want to get from that? Like, is it like, are you like doing the Vince McMahon? Are you like doing the Michael Cole? What do you feel for that? What would be your dream in that scenario?
To be honest, I don't watch a ton of it today. I mean, my memories are really the 80s, 90s, and then a little bit of the 2000s. And I kind of think back to like the Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse the Body Ventura. And I love Jim Ross too. I mean, like he's just amazing, his energy level and the way that he sells the big moment. But I love the theatrics and the production and the energy of it. I just think it's similar to, I haven't done a lot of hockey. I've done some college hockey. Hockey's actually the sport I played the most growing up. I imagine playoff hockey and pro wrestling have that same kind of energy factor to them. Like you really don't know what's going to happen next kind of feel. I just think it would be fun to just let it all out. I mean, to me, like that is like the event where just fun hysteria is not only allowed but required and highly encouraged. And I think it allows you to have a lot of fun with wordplay and to kind of almost develop your own character, even if you're the straight guy. That you can kind of still do that in the same way. It's always intrigued me. When I've seen roles open with them over the years, I've thought about like, would I be any good at that? Like, could I do that? And there's friends of mine that I think would There's a gentleman named Darren Hedrick, who I worked with at AAA for 3 years. He now works at University of Kentucky. He does baseball games for them, women's hoops. He's the studio guy for football, fills in on men's basketball. He's a huge, lifelong wrestling fan and would be an amazing pro wrestling guy. And there are times where like we'll be either texting each other on the phone or when we're hanging out where we'll go into fake wrestling commentary, but insert real people from our lives into it and just dream up like weird scenarios with it. And it makes us laugh so hard.
You know, Jamie Ramsey is also a big fan.
Oh, yes.
He's definitely someone who would probably do that with you.
Yeah. We've talked wrestling and he also got me into F1. And
yeah.
So there are plans for at least a significant number of the beat writers and me and some members of the PR staff to watch the race in Austin, not this coming weekend, the weekend after on that Sunday. We're all going to get together. And I bought F1 shirts.
Wait, you're coming to Austin?
No, we wind up watching it on some bar television. I think that's still TBD. We're trying to figure out the best way to see it. Now we don't have that kind of coin. I mean,
I wanted to point this. Go ahead, Carlos. I'm so sorry.
I was watching college football a couple of weekends ago, and Gus Johnson was calling the game. And I remember I talked to my wife, and I was like, I can imagine Sadak and Gus Johnson in the same booth calling the game. Like there'd have to be no chairs, no liquids by. Like if it was an exciting game, it would be craziness.
Yeah, Gus did Knicks games on the radio for a long time, and that was around the time when I was in college. And there were a lot of times I'd be driving on the highway going back and forth from my hometown to college or going to work, or I played in an adult late night hockey league, and I would listen to his radio call and rise and fire. It was super, super entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, he gets me excited for games that I could care less about.
Yeah.
I will always stop and watch a Gus Johnson game. Doesn't matter what it is. Yeah, he's
that's what the greatest travesty though is that I always felt what he was best at was the NCAA tournament. Yeah. And then when he went to Fox, unfortunately that went away. Him and a 215 upset in the making was just magic.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote a feature article on my website in 2020 about the 10-year anniversary of the Xavier versus Kansas State Sweet 16 game he did in 2010. Mm-hmm. And so I had to go back and I rewatched the broadcast like 6 or 7 times. And just as Crawford's got to hurry, this is bananas, this kind of stuff is just, you know what I mean? And it's just, there's no one just captures that moment like him. And I got to know Tim Kitzrow from NBA Jam a little bit. And even he, even though he did it for video games, he still also has one of those not just the He's on Fires and the From Downtowns and stuff like that, but he also still has one of those voices that you hear it and you're like, okay, I'm in. What are you going to do today? So
I love NBA Jam. That was brings me back to the Super Nintendo days.
Oh man, I'm with you. I wanted to point this out before we kind of move to different things. So we, obviously have kind of had a bunch of interactions with our fan base and people who listen to our show, and also they're obviously diehard Reds fans. You actually have something where a lot of people really love, where Susan Berry in our chat said she loves that you add another dynamic, a dimension to broadcasting by interacting with fans on social media, like when they asked for you to step in for the Wade Miley fan club. So, you've talked a lot about how Reds fans have been awesome and the passion and the things you expect from them, but what has this fan base really been like that whole first year of just the ups and downs are always there, but it seems like you've really, for at least a big majority of the fan base, people are like, you're our guy now.
And that's not easy. That's not easy to win over.
It is not at all.
Yeah, I could never declare anything like that myself, but the interactions that I've had have all been awesome. People have been very welcoming. It's the experience of going through any sports season, but I think more in baseball than any other. You become like family, it's every day. You're hanging out together every day. When I think of baseball myself, those are the memories for me of being with my dad, my grandmother, my grandfather. They would be sitting there watching the game with me. and talking about the game, talking about their memories, or talking about a moment that was similar to something that happened in that game that happened earlier in their life. And the Reds fans have all been incredibly warm and friendly and welcoming. I have been just blown away by the kindness that I've been shown, and I hope and think that it comes from that. Yeah, I love doing this. I love doing this job. I've fallen in love with the Cincinnati area, with this team. This is our home. We moved here, and I'm here for the long haul. I'm in this experience because I want to be here. This is what I've always wanted, was an opportunity like this. And I'm very happy that we have almost kind of fallen, by circumstance into what I think is probably our ideal spot.
But we want you here. Yeah. Stay forever. Please don't leave us, John.
I am not leaving. I can promise you that.
How much fun was that game you got to do this year when Johnny Bench came to the booth?
That was pretty cool. It was so he was my mom's favorite player, which I did not know until I got this job. For all the times that we had talked baseball as a family, that had never come up until actually it was even in the interview process. And I called my mom and let her know, hey, this is what's going on. And she's like, oh, I wonder if you'll get to meet Johnny Bench. He was my favorite player. Oh, sorry, guys. And yeah, that was really neat. And he was very accommodating. He generously took a couple of pictures that I was able to shoot over to my mom, and he waved her a hello in a short video too. And then I saw him again. We were recording some stuff in advance of Marty's induction into the Hall of Fame. As all the players were coming in, we were getting some evergreen stuff to use for rain delays and some features on that night. And he was one of the guys that came in for that too. Yeah, he's a guy that just gets having fun, and just being loose and free spirit. And I mean, obviously he's one of the all-time greatest players in the history of the game, but he also has that personality, where the guy did TV, he's built for it.
He was on fire that night. He was great. Yeah. He was on fire. I love it.
He gave it that. Yeah, the body language was down. I mean, he plays to the camera. I mean, the guy, you could tell he's a pro's pro, and he has that feel. And he was really a treat. He lived up to the hype in every way possible. And he was so kind and generous too off camera. Most guys that are in those types of spots that I've come across over the years, kind of would swoop in, do something, and even if they really show a lot of personality on camera, and they kind of go their own way. And he took the time, to hang out, to engage. He was great. He was really a treat.
That's awesome. I loved it. I think it's pretty early on in the year, whenever it was after we had our first podcast, and I tweeted you to ask Barry what a choopy choopy was. And then he explained it to you, and then like 2 innings later, there it was, a choopy choopy.
And he brought it up a few more times during the year too. Yeah. That became that was.
I loved it.
Yeah, that and actually, now that you mention that, I had never heard the phrase before, bases drunk. And then I've seen it on Twitter like 4 times in like the last couple of weeks, people talking about it, watching like end of regular season into the postseason stuff too.
Yeah.
So awesome.
John, did you see the Seattle Mariners videos that they did with their broadcasters? They did like the side by side. If we ever saw that of you, what would you be like in a big call?
I think it would depend a bit on the call, but it would be similar to Dave Sims, who does the Mariners stuff, who had probably that one real iconic one of the penultimate day of the regular season. Dave was the first major league guy that gave me a real tape review. He had just gotten done with a workout in his hotel, and I'd emailed him. I found his email address online, and he called me, and he was on the phone with me for almost an hour. Went over my tape, went over my background, gave me ideas on what I could or should do with both, my tape, with my general broadcast style, who to contact, wanted to know my story. And he's one of the guys. So, I told the story before that when it was the worst of the pandemic for me, and I went almost a year with no work, I wrote every team in baseball. Well, that's not the only thing I did. I mean, I had a lot of time. I also made sure I contacted everybody who would help me at any point in my life. And I contacted him because he was such a huge help. He was that first guy that kind of gave me an endorsement that I could really do it at a high level. And I called him just to say thanks, no ulterior motive at all. And he was so sweet and so kind. And he took another hour on the phone catching up with me and wished me the best of luck. And he was the first major league guy that when it was announced that I had the job, he called me. And it was, it makes me emotional to think about it. I mean, the guy was like so nice. It was so generous. It didn't have to do any of that, and just took that time. But yeah, I see that moment that he had, and it would be very similar. Like you would, there would be a lot of hands moving around. I kind of speak with my hands a lot as it is, and in those big moments, there is a physical reaction. You know, sometimes it's getting up out of the chair. Sometimes it's like the fist that slams down on the table. You know, the fist punching in the air. You know, it's sincere, raw emotion. Like when that big moment happens, you feel it and you're communicating that sensation more than just what happened, but the feel of it happening. I think that's part of our job, and that's part of what I think naturally do, and I try to accomplish with every call. And you would see a lot of movement during the course of that call.
Reds, get on that. We need some videos of that next year.
Yeah, no kidding.
I need that.
The Joey Votto homer streak, we could have had a compilation, I'm sure.
Oh, the last 2 days in particular, like as it happened, it was like combination of course he did, and disbelief, and oh my goodness, and like all of it together. It was sensational. Not quite the Joe Rogan like GIF eye bulge moment, but very similar to what Dave offered with Seattle, and what Adam Amin, who now works for the Chicago Bulls,
yep.
You know, does some playoff games on Fox. When he did the Final Four for years on TV, I did it on radio, and they would use that little like fisheye lens kind of courtside and show his reactions and big calls, and it was very, very similar to that.
Yeah, I watched the Bulls religiously. The Bulls and the Lakers, for some reason, I've just always watched all their games nonstop my whole life. So having Adam Amin has been a blast to be with Stacey King. It is so fun.
Yeah, those are some very loose, cool dudes. The the first major league like regular season game I ever did was actually with the Bulls. The year that Neil Funk announced that he was retiring, Adam did about half dozen games. And I wound up working with Stacey King a couple of games, one on WGN, one on NBC Sports Chicago. And that was a really cool crew and a fun show. It's Stacey is like, he is the catchphrase master.
Yes. Yes, he is. It's like, if you have NBA League Pass, watch Bulls games strictly for Stacey King. It's awesome. Kind of curious to ask you this. I wanted to ask you this when we had you on the last time, and it slipped my mind just because, you know, we have so much fun when we do this with you, obviously. One of the cool things about, like, you know, me working with these two guys is great. You know, Carlos kind of gives the dynamic of what it's like to be a pro ball player. And Nick is someone who I learned so much from with statistics and sabermetrics and analytics and things like that. We're like, how I can use those to better understanding a player. For you guys, you know, baseball kind of being something where the younger generation's kind of getting back into it, but the older generation still stays true to like batting average above everything else. Pitcher wins matter more than this. How did you find that comfortable line of like, when's it a good time to use OPS? When's it a good time to use, you know, exit velocity, things like that? What was that like kind of line like for you guys to find that like the right times to use analytics and the right times to just kind of talk quote unquote straight baseball?
I think it's a great question. I don't think we have. I don't know exactly where that line is. I think there's always a chance you could alienate some, and there's a chance you're going to really entertain others. I think part of our job is to help educate and inform, but you don't want to sledgehammer it. You know, I'll let you inside on something that happened this year. I was asked at one point to do a series of segments on the pregame show about advanced stats and kind of explaining them. And I said purposefully, I don't think that's a good idea. And only because there is a segment of people that probably don't love that right now. And I think that's best explained by an analyst than by the play-by-play guy. And I thought that it would pigeonhole me in a way to be the stats guy. And I love advanced stats. I think they have tremendous value. I think they're predictive and informative and can really give clarity and perspective to what a moment means, whether something was achieved or not achieved. And I struggle some with finding that middle ground, exactly where that is. I think that's something that the whole sport collectively, we need to do a better job of selectively using it as an educational tool. And that's something that I don't think is one of my strengths, is teaching. I try to, like, I work with our daughter a ton on her homework and stuff like that. I taught on a collegiate level, like, just as an adjunct on some basic communication courses. And I don't necessarily think I found the perfect voice on how to do that. And I don't mean vocal quality, but I mean more just like the marriage of the technical terms with the simplistic. I think that best comes across, in my opinion, when the analyst takes that number and breaks it down simply. And I think you want to try to not alienate the person who readily knows what it is, and you want to try to engage the person that doesn't, and translate it essentially into a way that's directly connected and meaningful. I don't know the best way to do that. I think there's going to be a slight disconnect, no matter what, at some point to a portion of the audience. So I do think, you would hit on it, and I think that's most apropos, is that you have to be a little more selective. I did make a conscious effort, probably around halfway through the season, that I pulled back on some of the stats info that I was giving, because I felt like there were some members of the audience that didn't want it, that didn't like it, that didn't see the value in it. So I wanted to make sure that I underscored the numbers that I thought were most important, most predictive, and what really impacted the Reds game that night. Like, why does this number matter here and now? Why does it matter in, XYZ players' third at bat, this number or this ranking or this trend or tendency or matchup with that hitter? I wanted to try to tie it in more directly. I think it's part of our job is to give that background so that everybody is as informed as they can be. But at the same time, there has to be a looseness and a comfort factor, and it shouldn't feel like a classroom, if that makes sense. And I don't know that I found the perfect spot for that. That's something that I'm still looking for, and I welcome feedback on. That I think I need to try to find that best middle ground for.
How, you talk about feedback. How difficult is that to not have like a coach above you or somebody to give you that constant feedback? Like, as a, an athlete or, someone at their everyday job, they've got somebody to give them feedback. Who's giving you feedback? How are you knowing when to get better and what not to do and what to do?
A lot of people give me feedback. And I consciously try to choose those that give me feedback from a pretty wide variety. Because I think if you listen to any one type of group, it will be, you'll tend to hear a lot of the same things. And then it won't be representative of the entire audience. So there are many other announcers, guys that pretty much all of them I came up with at some point, that now work at the major league level for a number of other teams. And I'll ask them, hey, there's a stretch in the 5th, 6th inning tonight that I thought I nailed, or I thought I missed, or I thought I could have handled differently. Can you watch it? Give me your feedback. Or sometimes it's more generic, just, hey, would you mind watching the open in the 1st inning of this game? And just tell me what you think. And so these are people that I trust, and that they have me review their stuff too. And they'll tell me like, hey, I thought your energy was too high or too low. I thought this was good. This was bad. This is why. I don't always agree with it. Sometimes I hear mistakes that they think are fine, and vice versa. I also would get that feedback from my representative, who makes a job of trying to find jobs for people and giving that kind of feedback. And then I have friends of mine that never worked in broadcasting, that are just sports fans. Some are Reds fans, some are not Reds fans, and I'll do the same with them. And I'll also ask them, like, if you're watching and you see something that you really like or don't like, text me, email me, whatever, Usually not during the game because it's a little too much of a distraction. I honestly won't even really read it if it happens during a game. But I try to ask for a pretty wide group, and I ask my wife and I ask my parents, and I think they're generally going to give more slanted commentary. There are things they're critical of sometimes or ways they try to help me improve. But those are the main audiences that I kind of seek that from. And I don't think you can do it every game. There's just too many games. It's too much stuff to try to process. But I think you have to do that a couple of times a month. I think that's part of the job, is kind of taking a self-temperature check of like, where am I? Where should I be? How can I get there?
Yeah. Do you and your partners talk about that maybe like the next day about last night's game at all?
Some, I would say probably most with Jeff Brantley. Jeff has been in television for a long time and worked at ESPN, where on the national level, you would get more of that direct feedback from coordinating producers on a regular basis. And he's a real student of broadcasting. He'll talk about it often that he wanted to be a baseball announcer even before he wanted to be a baseball player. And so, while he loved being a player, and there's nothing that will replace that high, being an announcer comes as close to it for him, and it's one of his lifelong goals. And he's a broadcast nerd. He knows what makes a good broadcast, and he's been an excellent sounding board too, to kind of give some information. I mean, I do that with Barry and Chris on certain things that we have going on, but Jeff also has that overarching kind of overall knowledge, and he's a guy that does play-by-play. I mean, he does it on the radio, a different medium, but he also engages in that regularly and has for a number of years too. And he gives excellent feedback.
Nice.
Jeff Brantley is a guy that has just improved every single year that he's been here, and he kind of gets like classified as this goofball, but he's really, really good at his job. And it's really cool when you can see a guy progress like he has. And I just think he's just such a great example of, kind of what hard work can do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he is always improving. He is always equally kind of self-critical. And he'll ask a lot of times, like, even to our producer too, what do you think of this? How could we handle this differently? Have ideas coming at a break for how we can handle things. Because most analysts don't think of the broadcast in that big and technical a scope. It's more observations about the game, where he's doing that. And he's super engaged in every pitch and what's happening in the game. But he also has that bigger view for where the pregnant pause works best, or what single word choice would best underscore this moment, or how do we, seg from this down moment in the game to something that's a little silly that we can just do in conversation and banter. And I think he not only has that skill set, but I agree with you that I think you can see he puts in the work. Like, he puts in a ton of work.
I think Barry is one of those guys too. You kind of saw, like, as the year went on, him getting more and more comfortable, because Barry also worked at ESPN, but he did Sunday Night Baseball, not necessarily the broadcast. He did the pregame show, right. And just that different. So, and I've talked about it a few times on here, like Barry's brother Byron, I got to know a little bit from covering Xavier games, and Byron is like, when you're at a pregame with him, his nose is in the book. He is reading everything about every guy on every team, so that way he has it ready. And I feel like Barry started kind of catching that more and more as the season went on, and kind of like not necessarily taking something particularly from his brother Byron, but getting more similar to what I'm familiar with his brother.
Yeah, I think anytime when, because he didn't have a ton of game reps entering the year, and there's nothing that replaces the reps. Nothing. I mean, you can study and learn all you want about the idea of broadcasting, but broadcasting is an activity that you learn by doing. It's a lot like playing sports. You could understand all the concepts of baseball, but until you actually pitch or swing a bat or try to field a ball, the concepts don't matter. You have to go out there and exercise those physical muscles in the same way that you do on a game broadcast. And I felt that too. And there's a looseness to Barry that I think came across, that he can be fun and irreverent and can be silly in a good way. But then, when the game calls for it, when it's a tight moment, when something big happens, that, he reacts appropriately to that too. And it can kind of be engaged in that moment.
Yeah, that's got to be tough for someone like Barry, or even like Cowboy, just being a former player and, not agreeing with the manager's doing, or not agreeing with a certain approach by a hitter. Like, that takes a lot to hold that in. And you can tell, I can tell by him speaking sometimes that he's not too happy about something, but other broadcasters or analysts, they don't hold it back. They let it go. And I thought Barry did a really good job several times throughout the year of, just kind of confining his emotions and is continuing to do his job. He did a really good job.
Yeah, I think all three guys are expressive in different ways and view the game through different lenses. I find with Chris, with Jeff, with Barry, I learned something every game, and what I learned with each guy would vary a little bit. That what they're seeing and noticing and anticipating for each guy would be a little different than the other. And I think those flavors all together, I hope and think, made our shows better. That we had that kind of different set of views.
Yeah. John, I'm sure you won't want to get into specific players or anything like that, but in general, what is some things maybe you would like to see the Reds do this offseason?
This offseason, in general, I think you'd like to see the team get younger. I think you'd like to see the team get more athletic. I think you'd like to be a little better defensively. I don't know where I'm at right now on some of the advanced defensive metrics. I think there's weight in some of them. I also think sample size is a problem with some of them. But some of the advanced defensive metrics were not super favorable. I do think Great American Ballpark can hide some of that because the dimensions are smaller. But I think that's the biggest thing. I'm torn bullpen wise on, yes, if you had one definitive elite level closer, I think that's the perfect dream scenario. That doesn't exist with a ton of teams in today's game. It's really hard to find that guy and for that guy to last for an appreciable span of time. I really liked where the bullpen ended the year. I thought Sessa was pitching his butt off. I thought Sims looked great. I thought we saw some pieces of better Amir Garrett. I think there's obviously room for growth there, but there's been established success in his prior years that tells you that that's possible. But I wonder, if Lorenzen goes, if Givens goes, then how are you arranging the back end? What's that going to look like? I think having more identity and established, tracks with the bullpen at the start of the year would be a big boost. But that's kind of, I don't know the full landscape free agent wise or have much imagination to what winds up happening in terms of trades. But to me, that's the general thing is I would like to see them be younger, a little more athletic, and to shore up the defense and to have more bullpen identity, going into a year. Yeah,
I agree. And you can spend $100 million on a bullpen and get no results. I remember the Colorado Rockies, they got 3 top relievers and none of them panned out. So yeah, I definitely agree with the defense. It's interesting. I think individual players, it can be misleading, but I think when you have a full team, the metrics are probably, pretty close. And I was looking back in 2019, the Reds, I don't know the exact number. They're like plus 30 as a team. Defensive run saves in 2019, they're like minus 30 this year. And so it's such a drastic difference. But if you look through each individual player, there wasn't like one guy that was like minus 50. There wasn't even anyone's even like the top 20. It's just collectively, most of the players were slightly below average, minus your Kyle Farmer or someone like that. It really kind of all added up. And even in 2019, there wasn't an elite defensive player, but they were all slightly above average. It's crazy how that can really, the totality of your whole team, it can really add up.
Yeah, and that's I try to, as often as possible, to lean on people that are much smarter than me to kind of sift through stuff. And so some of the folks that I know that work with some of those groups that accumulate defensive runs saved, and obviously there's a difference depending upon what authority you're citing. They're all in the same general area, but some of their methodologies are slightly different. They seem to think that it kind of lock in step with what you're saying, that the team numbers they do feel, because there is that larger overall data size, do have a lot more weight. And the individual ones, I mean, I would also look at some of the differences between defensive runs saved and outs above average. Like sometimes they do not agree at all with each other. You can have a guy rate well below average and then also elite in the other. I think Brian Reynolds with the Pirates was an example. I think outs above average, he spent most of the year in the top 10 in baseball, and defensive run saved, he was like slightly below average. But you watch the guy play, he's a really good player. He makes a ton of plays. We get to see him a lot. One has him as one of the elites, regardless of position, and the other has him as below average. And so I think we're still kind of scratching the surface with that. I don't think we're totally there. And that's one of the things that actually makes me really optimistic. I look at that as a positive. Imagine where we're going to be with our knowledge 15, 30 years from now. And we'll look back at this time as the Stone Age. We'll look back at this time and say, they were dumb. They didn't know what they were doing. But you don't get to see without going through A and B. And we're getting better every day.
Carlos had a really good question. I want to make sure he gets to ask about John's thoughts on the offseason with the CBA. Make sure you ask.
Oh, yeah. Just kind of interested to see what you thought, what you were what you might want to see, be in the CBA. Like, what did I write on here? The DH. Like, are you in favor of that? Shift adjustments. Do you want to see any changes to those? Because to me, that's probably my biggest one, even over the DH.
Same.
Robo umps. Things of that nature. Like, is there anything that you want to see or care to see or might help the game, in your opinion, better?
I think the universal DH is definitely coming, and I think it does injure some elements of strategy, but on the whole, you look at the gigantic drop that we have seen in pitcher production while hitting. I think it's probably better for the game to see that. I also think it would help the Reds immensely. I think the Reds would be one of the National League teams that would benefit from that immediately. I'm torn on the shift. I think teams should be rewarded for being smart about how they defend. And forever, you would defend extreme hitters in extreme ways. There are more extreme hitters today that just don't care about whether they hit into outs if it yields X amount of power. I hesitate on something like that only because I don't know what the outcome would be. And I don't know exactly how it would be defined. And somebody's going to find a loophole. Somebody's going to find a way to rig that, in the same way with an automated strike zone. Umpiring inconsistency is a real part of the game. But you put it in an automatic strike zone, I guarantee you, some guys are going to find a way to throw a pitch that is truly, literally unhittable, that is a strike every single time. And it's not going to be every pitcher. It's going to be a minuscule amount, but there's going to be like half a dozen or a dozen dudes that are going to have like a 0.2 ERA, are going to have a bazillion strikeouts and no walks because they find a way to gimmick pitch something that is always a strike.
I don't see a problem with that, John.
As long as they're all Reds. As long as they're all Reds.
I just think, like, with any massive rule changes like that, and even to a certain extent with the shift, I love that baseball is now embracing experimenting with rule change in the minor leagues. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's experiment down there and see what works. And that, to me, is the biggest thing that I hope the CBA can demonstrate and foster in the future, is a truly collective decision-making process between players and ownership to let's find ways to make the game better. I love the game right now, but if we can find a way that works, that does make the game better, and what's agreed is better by the majority and embraced by both sides, let's do it. And I'm not saying we invent baseball, but there have been changes. They changed the mound Like it's been done before. It's not like it's totally new. They expanded. There was an asterisk next to Maris's name forever because they lengthened the season. I think it's a sport that can be changed. All the other sports have had major changes during the course of their history. But yeah, I would say universal DH. I'm probably for. And I think it's coming. I think it's inevitable. In terms of the shift, I want to say get rid of it, but I don't know what's going to happen if you say that. And part of it also is going to be that, the one turn of phrase I heard was that everybody would have to be on the dirt and there would have to be 2 on each side of second base. Not every stadium has dirt set up in the same way. So then do we have to standardize how the dirt is laid out on every single field? And that's
you're already finding loopholes.
What's that?
I said, you're already finding the loopholes.
So it's just that I do think when you make major changes, there are unintended ramifications and consequences that can come about. And I shudder a little bit at especially doing too much in too compressed a span of time. I'm for the idea of change, but until I have more information on what that change will truly do, I would like to see tempo picked up. I would like to see a firmer pitch clock in place that makes the game have a greater sense of tempo. I do want that. And I also thought that there was Joel Sherman actually had the idea, the writer for the Post, who's on MLB Network a bunch. Replay review just takes forever. And yes, the idea is to get it right, but then it doesn't even get right half the time. And maybe half the time's egregious, but there are multiple times during the course of a year where it doesn't get it right. I like his concept of, he had proposed the idea of each team gets, I think it was 5 timeouts. And with those 5 timeouts, that's it you get for the entire game. You could use that for a replay challenge. You could use that to make an in-inning pitching change. But that's it. And when you exhaust those 5, that goes away. You don't have that anymore. Now, that's just a rough, raw idea, but something that adds layers of strategy and accelerates the pace of play, I do think is a good thing.
Sign me up for that. I'm all in for that.
We know you want the home plate umpire to be mic'd, and when that happens, we're gonna call it the Sadak rule.
Yes.
Oh,
I love your.
Look at these playoffs, right? We had back-to-back nights with crazy, the pinball carom off right field goes over the fence. How are they not mic'd up? And I'm not saying in the moment. I get it. They have to sort out everything. They're going to conference, but before play resumes again, address the people in the stadium, let alone everybody watching on the telecast, and tell them what happened. It's a sport that I feel like over a course of time, there's a segment that have this idea that you have to totally know everything all the time and make the best guess for yourself. I mean, it would happen in the minors constantly that it was a 2 umpire system in A-ball and that it was 3 in AAA, where things would happen. It was not readily clear what occurred. There was no hand signaling of any kind. And we'd have to send somebody downstairs to grab the umpire between innings to ask, what happened there? Oh, you called a balk? Well, he never actually pointed. He never said anything. And it flabbergasts me. And the idea that, that it was COVID related, they're on the field face to face with everybody with no masks on. They just put a mic on them. They can put a headset on them so they can talk to New York. You can't put a lav mic on them that they can talk to the stadium and to the broadcast audience. Of course you can.
Well, then you'd have some of those older umpires just leaving the mic on. You have a hot mic the whole time.
Joe West.
That would be fun.
I am real quick.
That would be fun.
I did hear one. I don't know if they're experimenting with it in the Atlantic League, but one idea for the DH I just heard was you lose the DH when you pull your starting pitcher. I was like, well, that would be because it's advantageous to pull your starting pitcher early. But if you lose that DH, that feels like it kind of kills 2 birds with one stone. I loved that idea.
Yeah, I do remember reading about that. And I agree with you. Yeah, that would add another layer of strategy. I do think, baseball is a thinking person's game, and I do like having more strategic elements to it. I also would think the player union would be in favor of that because that creates more jobs, Then the bench really matters, and that balance between how you handle a bullpen versus a bench and who's available is a really, really big deal. And then a pitcher's ability to hit or run could still be a factor if you have one or two select guys that are able to do that.
You still get double switches.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you're able to tell us this, and if you're not, it's totally okay. Can you confirm or deny that Joe Luckup's just a encyclopedia, or does he have some strange database that he can find every stat possible within 4 seconds?
No, he's just the smartest man on the planet. It's
okay.
I love that guy, man. He has such passion. He has so many ideas. He's super creative. He's a really sweet, generous guy too. He helped me a ton when I broke my arms and helping get me to and from the studio so that my wife didn't have to wake up our daughter in the middle of the night, to go down there, especially with the later road games. But he is super, super smart and really anticipates well. That's probably the hardest thing to do in that job, is to think of what could happen or what's likely, because you have to have that number ready for the moment before it happens. If you try to look it up in the moment, you're probably not going to get it in time where it really has that kind of impact. And he is incredibly good at his job. Really, really, really good at his job.
You two guys were made for each other.
I know.
As someone who's followed Joel for the last decade plus, yeah, you guys were really made to be in the same broadcast booth.
The one of the fun series of moments that would happen during the year is so something will happen during the game, and then I can see him like furiously going at whatever he's doing, and maybe one out of every like 10 or 11 times he'll then get to a number, and I've already looked it up, and then I say it on the air, and then he just like flails his hands and then hands me the card that had the number that I was just looking up, which I think is a good thing. I mean, it shows that we're kind of on that same page and in that same rhythm. And but yeah, he's just excellent. And I love when we talk, way before the game when he gets there and he's doing some of his prep. And he has a little downtime. We'll share a meal, and Jim Day's there and Barry's there. And usually Radio Tommy and Jeff will come over too, and Yid's there. And we'll just talk the game, like other teams, what's happening around the majors in general. And then also related to the Reds game that night. And there's true fandom there, that I think kind of comes across. And it's that passion that carries that kind of work to find stuff that's that interesting.
I want to ask about Luis Cessa, because I know you kind of talked about you got to see him pitch in Scranton a little bit before he did, obviously. So when he got traded here, you kind of said something like Reds fans are really going to like this guy. And obviously everyone who's in the majors got better from their time in AAA in that time frame. But what have you seen from him that's where he's grown most from his time that you saw him in AAA with the Yankees to where he's at now with the Reds?
The slider's way better. I mean, he has more definition to everything. When he was AAA with the Yankees, he was a starter that probably profiled as a reliever, but was starting in AAA. And he had a pretty wide pitch repertoire. But I don't know that he had any one pitch then like his slider is now. And then I think he also showed over the latter part of his Reds time this year, a much improved changeup. That was a pretty darn good pitch. He always had fastball with good velo. His velocity is much better now. And I always think he had the potential to be a higher leverage guy. I don't know about closer. Maybe he could. I've never seen him in that kind of a role. But the Yankees, when he got there in the big leagues, didn't use him in the bigger spots all that much. He was usually that first guy in. But he always had a calmness about him. He was a guy that many of us, not just me as the announcer, but I was running PR for the team too. The beat writers that would come in would kind of gravitate toward. There was always an air of positivity about him and a looseness factor. And I do think that looseness and personality, that there is a seriousness and a competitive side too, but I think it allows him to handle big moments. And he had a real dominant run. He went, it was like 27 straight innings at one point without letting a guy get on, or 27 straight batters, I should say. Basically threw a perfect game, over the course of a series of appearances. But that the slider is way different. It's sharper, it's commanded more consistently, and he's just nailing his spots and doing it with authority, to the point that he showed really, really good stuff and an ability to strand inherited runners.
Did he get any long innings with the Yankees while he was there?
Yeah, there were times where they would use him like that. And he was, in the very beginning of the big leagues, he was kind of a spot starter. But I don't know. I mean, seemingly based on their usage, they never seem to profile him as like a starter. That's one curious thing that came up with several analysts this year. Chris Welsh talked about it. And I want to say that Barry and Jeff also brought it up at some point. But Chris, I know, was the most enthused about it, about throwing out the idea of, like, could he start for the Reds? Is he an option to be a starter?
Yeah, especially if he has that third pitch working, then yeah. And, that's one thing I feel like the bullpen has to strengthen is long inning guys. Even going into next year, there's going to be several starters that are going to have a spot. And I think that's one spot they got locked down as a long inning guy. Yeah,
I would agree. And I'm curious to see what his future is going to look like, what Luis's future is going to look like, and to see kind of what that whole bullpen's identity is going to be. I really did feel like, obviously it was one of the hurdles for the team in the very beginning of the year. It stabilized and became solid for a stretch. And then it worsened a bit. And I thought over the last, it's hard to think of the calendar right now, but really after that trade, I thought there were firmer roles pretty quickly. It was basically going to be Givens or Lorenzen end game, became more Givens over the last, probably couple of weeks of the year. And that Sessa and Sims were incredibly effective when they were called upon. And I think Sims shows outstanding stuff. I mean, real stuff. And I think Sessa showed a very lively fastball and a deadly slider, and just kind of he had guts, an ability to kind of just execute a pitch. I mean, it's hard to do that. And I do think that's something that for the viewer and the fan gets lost at times. What these guys do, hitters and pitchers alike, is really, really, really hard. And, it's not roofing, and, they're not at war, but it's not easy to do what they do at a super high level. And the guys that do it and achieve it, I mean, yes, they're well compensated for it. They should be. It's really hard to do what they do.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, my personal experience is just, having really good minor league numbers and then getting to the big leagues. Like, I could, have my raw talent show in the minor leagues and just be, above the majority of hitters. But whenever you get down up to the big leagues, it goes, it's all right back to even. It's whether, so you better not miss your spot the way that you used to. You can get away with a lot more things. One thing that, talking to Joey, he's like, at the AAA level, AA, and the big league level is you can out-athlete most people if you're a big leaguer. No matter it's a pitcher or it's a hitter, you can get away with so much more stuff and hide so many more flaws. But, it's just, this is what he called it, was out-athlete, everybody else, the competition. But when you get to the big league level, no, that goes out the window. The true you comes out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would definitively agree.
Yeah, I thought Sims, Sessa, and Santi on the last, 2+ months of the year really, really, I think, solidified themselves as guys I think you can really count on and lean on, and a good foundation for the bullpen next year.
And I would also add to that list Art Warren. I mean, I thought when Art was healthy, he was in the zone, he attacked. I thought Tony the same way. That's where Tony's going to be an interesting concept too, because he was a starter, and he first came to the big leagues as a starter. But I love the way his fastball plays in relief, and that slider I thought got more definition. When he was starting, I had to go ask him after his first start. I said, I look at the Savant page, and you just got here. It only shows curveball, but it looked kind of sliderish at one point. Do you throw both? And he said, yes. And the two looked kind of similar to each other, and it was a good pitch. And I felt like when he went to the bullpen, that fastball, as he said, like he just let it eat, and the velocity went up, and it was just more than the velocity. There was an inability for hitters to really recognize and hit it. And I thought his slider played so much better too. And I thought found a much firmer role and identity and success rate. And he was a badass. I mean, he just kicked ass on the mound. I thought he and Art both were bulldog attack mentality kind of pitchers that had success. And I love seeing that in a reliever. I want a reliever to go in there and throw strikes and be aggressive. And you're going to get burnt sometimes and have that short memory. And I think both of them did that exceptionally well.
The walk's always worse than the home run for a 2-run homer, is I always say.
Yes, definitively yes.
Well, I think, is there anything else we got here, guys? Anything we want to touch on before we roll?
Can we do a couple rapid fire questions? We just got a bunch on the chat for you real quick, John.
Yes, by all means.
Sure.
We'll kind of do them rapid fire. Don't have to go too far. I'd love some questions here. What do you feel about the Reds' long inning eaters? This is from Cooper. Do they need to go get an arm? I'm guessing kind of referring to more of like the Jeff Hoffman types. I know Hoffman is under control next year.
Yeah, I think Tony can be that kind of guy. I think Sessa can be that kind of guy. I would kind of agree with Carlos that I think in terms of innings eaters, I think they're pretty set. I mean, yes, I'd always like more arms. Like, yes, especially with the rate of injury that's gone up for everyone in baseball. I think as many guys as you can get is a good thing. But I think I would be more curious about just the overall roles being a little more defined. It doesn't even have to be by inning necessarily, but just by type of situation and having that overall depth. But I don't think it necessarily needs to be innings eaters, but you wouldn't turn it down.
Yeah, I think for all the Reds' injury problems, position players, and the bullpen, they actually did get pretty fortunate with their starting pitching this year, especially when you look around baseball. One more here, Susan. How do you feel about the Cincinnati versus the world attitude? How can it help the Reds in 2022? I love that question from Susan.
I love that. I mean, when Tucker made those shirts, I thought that was so cool. And I love Tucker. I'm really curious to see what happens with him. I thought he was very generous and kind with being as open as he was about, his own worry and wonder about what's going to happen. He's a leader. He is respected by that team. I thought he had a very good year. Unfortunately, his year-end numbers didn't end the way you wanted them to. But I like that mentality. I think whatever allows the team and the fan base and everybody to feel as celebrated and as singular and connected as possible is great. And I thought that was a really cool concept, and I liked it a lot. It did seem that way at times. I mean, Lord knows, you look at the Castellanos suspension versus what happened with everybody else in baseball and every other moment that was similar to it. There might be something to that.
Yeah, and then one last thing before we kick it back to Tim. Is for me. Where can Reds fans find you this offseason? What networks are you on? Where can we find you calling games?
Well, football-wise, I'm on CBS Sports Network on TV. So I did Navy's near miss against 24th ranked SMU last week. I'm on Utah State, UNLV this week. Mostly Mountain West. One more Navy. I'll have one quasi-area game at Marshall as of right now. That'll be my only driving trip of the year. But I'll be on football through until Black Friday for college. I'll do Army Navy on the radio, which I've done now for 7 years, which is my favorite single event in sports. It's a great, great game. And my hoop schedule will be out shortly. And I'll wind up doing some NFL probably once we have those Saturday doubleheaders in December. And then probably 1 or 2 playoff games on radio.
All right.
Do you ever tweet those out? Like what games you're going to call?
Sure.
Yeah,
You should. I think
like
Reds fans would love that. I think they'd love to hear you. I'll shout you out whenever I hear you on something.
Probably take me a whole
Same.
quarter to get used to calling football though. When's Joey coming up to bat?
So this might make some folks listen a little uneasy, but I got the Xavier basketball schedule right behind me, and I see 3 CBS Sports Network games at home. So,
We're gonna be hanging out, John. You and I in the media room.
I would be all for any form of home game I could get, whether that's Xavier or Dayton. Unfortunately, with UC, after that new ESPN American deal, to my knowledge, I don't think any of their home events would wind up with CBS unless there was some kind of direct trade, which I guess does happen sometimes, but is not very common. But I am all for not having to get on a plane or leave my family and being able to drive to the arena and be home. So I would gladly sign up for whatever that looks like.
I'm pulling for you on the Xavier games. Push for it, John. Push for it.
Me too. Well, John, it's our second time we had you on. It's always a blast. I know we're going to have you on many more times for the history of the show while you're here with the Reds because you're one of our favorite guests. Thanks again for always giving us time and then giving us more time than, we asked for is always appreciated as well. Especially so we can't wait to see how year 2 goes. And like Nick said, I hope I bump into you at some Xavier games this year.
You got it. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And thanks for going Hawaiian with me. I'm going to make a push to make this the official game shirt. I don't know how my bosses will react, but this is what I want to wear on the air every single
That's got to be the day game shirt. It has to be the day game
shirt.
Definitely.
Chris used to do bow tie Tuesday. We definitely need to go to Hawaiian shirt any day. Any day. Yeah. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this week's edition of Late Night Reds Talk Live. Thank you all, as always, for tuning in. We absolutely love having you join us and talk some Reds with us. We'll be back, same bat time, same bat channel next week. Have a good night.
See you.